What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so getting back into our discussions on Earth X, I'm really excited about this because this is when we start to wind things down. For the most part, we have like maybe one more video left after this, and that's pretty much when we conclude it. But this is cool because this actually has a pretty huge moment at the end of the story. The cool thing is, again, we're basically talking about a story where everybody on Earth gained superpowers. You know, it's essentially a story where Black Bolt of the Inhumans had detonated the Terrigen bomb and effectively set the Terrigen mist all around the Earth, waking up all these different powers of Terrigenesis inside of people. And the result is that where we would normally believe that like the Earth might become a better place, what this basically gave us was the idea that the Earth became somewhat of a worse place because you had people who were like, well, now I've got superpowers, I can do anything. And this really hit it home with the idea of the Skull. Basically this young kid whose power was to dominate the minds of others. Now, of course, Captain America, having become somewhat disillusioned, as well as Peter Parker, who abandoned his role as Spider-Man, them alongside whatever superheroes are left that haven't been dominated by the Skull, are basically trying to like keep New York from completely going under. And that's one thing to bear in mind. The Skull was based out of LA. And so over the course of however long, he had basically transitioned from Los Angeles, moved all the way east to New York. Now, this is a pretty big moment because what this means is that essentially anybody with superpowers that the Skull came across was brought under his control. And when he moved into the city of New York, basically he's got an army of millions of people at his disposal. The guy dominates the entirety of New York. He's got everybody he picked up from LA, which is already in the millions, moving all the way to the east. So I mean, it's a huge number at this point. And in truth, we're talking about Captain America, for the most part, fighting a losing battle. But the cool thing about this is that when Peter Parker shows back up again, and when he starts to talk about how these guys are basically mindless slaves of the Skull, suddenly it triggers something in the mind of Captain America, something we hadn't thought about before. And what we end up doing is transitioning to the residence of Ben Grimm the Thing and Alicia Masters. And this is cool because remember, Alicia's powers basically is the ability to give life to clay, to essentially mold something out of clay and then bring it to life so that it can either, operate of its own accord or it can do whatever she tells it to do. But before we jump into all this, what we end up doing is picking back up with really like the Celestials themselves. At the end of the last video, we had talked about how Black Bolt of the Inhumans had basically left Earth and taken off to the moon to confront the Celestials for when they arrived and try to find a way to destroy them. But what we're basically told here in this conversation between Uatu the Watcher and Reed Richards is that in truth, the actions of Black Bolt are null. I mean, there's nothing he can do to stop the Celestials. He's just not that powerful. He doesn't have the capabilities to do it. But Reed counters and says that was never the point. The point of Black Bolt was never to like destroy the Celestials. The point of Black Bolt was to let out a quasi-sonic scream that would basically be an SOS and it would call for help. It would basically send out a signal to, one or more beings out there that would bring them in and essentially allow them to fight on behalf of Earth's superheroes to stop the Celestial hosts. And so what we end up doing is jumping back to Captain America, and this is when we find out the entire plan that he had. The goal was that if those individuals who can think for themselves are basically taken under the control of the Skull, then basically, essentially make an army of people that the Skull can't control. And that's where the whole scheme comes in. Captain America's idea here is to create an entire army of clay figures who can fight against the Skull and his army, and the Skull can't control them. But this is cool because what ends up happening is Captain America shows up as a clay model, only for us to realize it's not actually a clay model. It's Captain America covered in clay. The idea was to get close enough to the Skull that he would never suspect them, that he would just think it's one of the soldiers who were out there. But when Captain America runs up on the Skull, he does the only thing he can do, and he kills him. Now that's huge. This is a huge moment with Captain America. Captain America, under normal circumstances, will never kill an enemy. It's kind of a rule of his character. As far as I'm aware, in Marvel Comics, I don't think he's ever actually killed people before. I mean, I'm sure there's times where like he would have to, but I mean, for the most part, like no enemy is beyond redemption. He's very much, Batman-esque in that regard, in terms of how he views enemies and how he views, foes and different things like that. But in this instance, in this story, this is designed to be a Captain America starkly different from the one that we're used to. A Captain America that is kind of beyond the role of saying like everyone can be saved and looking at like the harsh reality of the world he's in and saying sometimes there's only one alternative, and that is to kill the Skull. It's the only option they had. And so with the Skull being killed, everybody's basically released from his mind control. And then essentially we end up finding out that like Tony Stark, where he's been residing in this citadel of sorts, that he's basically aware of what's going on with the Celestials, that these celestial beings essentially are the reason why everybody has powers, or at least why some people have powers, and that Black Bolt was essentially kind of like trying to complete this circle without really realizing what was going on. And the reason why I say this is because Black Bolt of the Inhumans was aware of the Celestials. He was aware of the idea that the various superheroes on Earth didn't just get powers one day, that their genes had been modified by the Celestials so that they would gain powers somewhere along the line, and that they would basically be antibodies to protect the celestial seed inside of the Earth, so that when the seed matures and when the seed is ready to basically emerge from Earth, that yes, it would destroy the entirety of the planet Earth, but a new celestial would be born. Black Bolt knew about all this, and Black Bolt had given everybody on Earth powers by way of Terrigenesis, because he knew that the Celestials would eventually return one day, and when they do, there would have to be superheroes who would be capable of taking down the Celestials. The problem is that no one has the power to be able to do this, because remember, when it comes to Terrigenesis, it's a crapshoot. There's no way to know what powers you're gonna have. There's no way to know what your powers are going to be. It's just you go into Terrigenesis and you emerge with whatever abilities you have. But this random chance, the probability of somebody developing powers that, can basically challenge the Celestials increases exponentially the more people there are with powers on Earth. And so at the same time, Tony Stark had realized exactly what was going on as well. And what Tony had been doing the entire time he'd been hiding out in his bunker is basically developing a massive God killer kind of armor. Now again, this is one of the reasons why Earth X is such an influential story, because you look at things like this and then suddenly you jump forward to the more recent run of Iron Man when they're introduced to like the God killer armor, which is basically a giant suit that was designed to destroy Celestials. And so again, that's why this really influenced a lot of future stories. But it's funny because even Tony Stark himself realizes that he's a stopgap measure. He doesn't have the power to like destroy Celestials. He doesn't have that kind of ability because the Celestials are godly beings. They're entities. They're designed to be beyond any real human that exists out there. The other half of this is that picking up with like the Asgardians themselves, the funny thing is that Loki is the only person who realized the nature of things. Now remember, we discovered this earlier in the story. Uatu the Watcher had basically explained this to us earlier in the story, that the Asgardians aren't beings who are literally gods. They were formless. They were just some sort of, some entities that existed out there, and they were given form when they first met humans. That humans looked upon them and said, wow, these beings must be the Asgardians. Like, this must be Odin, this must be Loki, this must be Thor. And then suddenly these beings adopted that mentality and they became the very heroes or the very characters that humans believed in. And so literally, the Asgardians are funneled by human belief. That's the whole basis behind Ragnarok. The Ragnarok won't happen because like Loki will lead an army against Asgard. Ragnarok will happen and Asgard will end because eventually humanity will be destroyed. And when humanity is destroyed, there'll be no one left to believe in the Asgardians. Ergo, these beings will revert back to their shapeless forms. Quote unquote, Asgard will come to an end. But Loki is the only one to have realized this. Odin, Thor, all these people, none of them believe him. They all think it's just the ravings of a madman, that it's insanity. And so Loki does the only thing he can do and basically kills himself and reverts to the realm of Mistress Death. Now we're gonna find out that there's actually a motivation for why he did this, but it is cool because again, it's people who kind of look at him and say, well, he's a trickster, he's a god of lies is all he is. And he's just making things up. It's just absolute nonsense. But jumping back over to Iron Man, in this kind of last ditch effort to take down these Celestials to buy as much time as possible, he literally just like flies his vessel into one of them and is totally destroyed. But what ends up happening is we basically find out that like the efforts of Reed Richards and really the efforts of Black Bolt rang out true. That where Black Bolt's voice was sent out into the cosmos in an effort to find help, that when we switch over to like Jameson, basically the son of J. Jonah Jameson, a person who's working on the moon at the moment, that he's essentially gained access to the ultimate nullifier. And where he intends to use the ultimate nullifier to destroy all things, there's no need for him to. And the reason why there's no need for him to is because the backup, the signal sent out by Black Bolt has been received. The being that they were hoping for, who would show up to basically save Earth, has arrived. What this means is that Galactus has finally returned back to Earth. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, in the next video, we wrap it all up. We are ending Earth X. Something else that I'm also gonna do too, and a lot of you guys have noticed this recently with a trend that's been going on. When we have like a multi-part story, you guys have noticed that like we've created one big video at the end of it. And we're gonna do that with Earth X. With Earth X, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take all the videos that we've done and combine them into one great big huge video and then just sort of throw it out there. A lot of you guys really seem to enjoy that. Like a lot of you guys really seem to just kind of put like this 2-hour long video on in the background and then just let it play while you're studying or cleaning your house or whatever the case may be. So we're gonna do that with Earth X, and we'll probably do that with like the big stories going forward, with like the big story arcs, the YouTube equivalent of trade paperbacks, so to speak. But anyway, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.